This is E&P Reports, a service of Editor and Publisher magazine since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. And hi once again, Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P. And it was the great comedian Jack Benny who was quoted as saying, "Timing is everything." We're not here talking about comedy. We're talking about essential legislation currently in Congress. It's H.R. 7640, H.R. 7640, the Local Journalism Sustainability Act. Believe it or not, a bipartisan bill that right now has 39 supporters in Congress that offers three tenets to help support local journalism and help stop the creation of these news deserts, the problems our industry is having in staying afloat, especially during COVID-19. The three tenets are simple. A tax break for those that employ journalists, those that create local content. The second tenet, a tax break for the advertisers that support us. And the third tenet, a tax break for the subscribers of local journalism. You might find it hard to believe that the legislators in the U.S. Congress would accept the idea of supporting journalism, another check on them as set forth in the Constitution, but they are behind it. But timing is everything. Now is a critical time for us, the local news media, to contact our local senators and congressmen, make them aware of the bill, and make them support it. So we're going to get a quick update now from four critical players in the life of this bill. We're going to talk to Francis Wick, the CEO and president of Wick Communications, because it was Francis's brainchild that started the entire bill. He took it to his local congressman, who then found a co-sponsor in Washington State. Thus, we're going to chat with Alan Fisco, the president of the Seattle Times, who's been working hand in hand with Francis to help champion the legislation. We're also going to talk to Paul Boyle, senior VP of public policy at the News Media Alliance, who has been working in DC diligently to help champion and find us more sponsors. And of course, we'll chat with our friend Dean Ridings from America's Newspapers, who is helping coordinate the entire effort and bring the information home to us, the local news publishers, and help us inform our communities on the value of what we provide each and every day. Timing is everything. So I hope you'll invest the next 30 minutes of your time as we explore H.R. 7640, Local Journalism Sustainability Act. Well, we've got a full crew here on E&P Reports. I call this the Brady Bunch view because I've got people surrounding me right now on the screen. To my left is Alan Fisco. Alan, welcome to E&P Reports. It's an honor to have you here. Alan, you're president at the Seattle Times, so thank you so much for your valuable time, sir.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
To my right, Francis Wick. We've had you on before discussing the same topic. Francis, you are currently in Oregon, correct, right now, on a mission?
That is correct.
All right, cool. Dean Ridings, you're down there where Jan Brady usually is, or whoever. Dean, of course, CEO of America's Newspapers, and Paul Boyle, our first experience in an interview, an editor and publisher. Paul, you're Senior Vice President of Public Policy at the News Media Alliance, the old NAA. We're honored to have you on today as well. This is a quick update as we take a look at what everybody's been affectionately calling LJSA. Do I have that right? Paul, it's actually the Local Journalism Sustainability Act, correct? And it was the brainchild, if I may say, although Francis, you keep showing us your amazing humility. But Francis, if I may, we did an interview with you earlier. If anyone has no idea what we're talking about, is you told me you woke up on one Saturday and had, if I may quote you, a Jerry Maguire moment. Am I correct, Francis? Why don't you quickly again review the origins of how the Local Journal Sustainability Act started, Francis, just so we can get a quick update.
Yeah. So again, hopefully the outcome becomes a little better than what happened in Jerry Maguire, and that I'm able to keep my job. But the long and short here was, as the pandemic came underway, it became very apparent to me that we were going to see, and we are seeing, a proliferation of news deserts across this country. And journalists are going to be going away, and it's a very, very frightening proposition for our country, for communities, and for the mission that we all have signed up to serve. And the Local Journalism Sustainability Act has had a lot of partners along the way. No one part of the act is unique in itself. As I shared in our previous discussion, Alan and the Seattle Times team has been doing a tremendous amount of work, and some ideas have come from their part of the country. Our friends from Richner Communications out in New York, and the Paul Boyle, the gentleman who is sitting with us here, was helping kind of provide some guiding rails on how to maneuver within the policy arena, and that has been helpful as well. So.
But you came up with this idea that basically offered incentives, tax incentives, if I may, for not just newspapers. People think this is a newspaper initiative, but for anyone that professionally creates local news. Am I correct, Francis? That was the vision in your mind, and compensation not just for the salaries we pay, but for the advertisers that support the industry. And then also, of course, for the subscribers. I mean, maybe broadcast TV doesn't take a piece of that one, but anyone who subscribes to local news as well could have a tax credit. And that was the origin of it, right, Francis?
Yeah, it was really looking at the ecosystem that supports local journalism and trying to make sure that we were incentivizing the right behaviors to bridge what I consider is a gap in the transformation of the legacy business model into a future business model. And the pandemic has really, really impaired our ability to, as an industry, to make that transition. And so the key here was putting the right incentives for the right behavior.
Exactly. And remember, we did an interview with Walter Hussman. Many of you know who he is, in Arkansas, who said that, and I'm paraphrasing, that nonprofit is an oxymoron. He liked the idea of profitability in our industry because that generates growth. So rather than just give up the ship, find a way to use the system in order to still allow us to be profitable. Now, the reason I think we've got Alan on this, and I could be wrong, is you took it first to Ann Kirkpatrick, your Democratic representative in Arizona, because you're Arizona based, not today, but that's where you're at. And Alan, the co-sponsor, this is actually true bipartisan, am I correct, is Dan Newhouse, a Republican from Washington State. Is that how we got the Seattle Times involved in this, Francis?
Yeah, we've been involved. First, Francis got Congressperson Kilpatrick to co-sponsor the bill. And then working through Roland Thompson through the Washington Press Association, Roland reached out to Dan Newhouse, who then reached out to us, and we've been having multiple conversations. We started, Frank Blethyn, our publisher, who's been publisher now for 35 years, started a free press movement over a year ago, and we had a meeting in Seattle with both publishers as well as public policy people. Senator Cantwell's office, her state deputy was there, talking about what do we need to do to save the free press. And the focus has always been on how do we get compensation to support journalist positions to A, save the positions that we still have, and B, how do we actually grow those positions with a particular focus on news deserts that are existing and news deserts that are coming, getting more and more prolific, unfortunately, almost by the day. And one of the things that really attracted us to this particular bill is that it not only provides that support for journalists, but it does so over a 5-year window. And so to Francis's point earlier, it really helps us kind of transition. We're in the middle of a business transformation where we're moving to digital, and the pandemic for the Seattle Times, and never wasting a crisis, we've seen huge growth in digital subscribers over the past 4 months. And I think this is just taking us a step closer, but we need to get there. We can kind of see the island, but we need some help in reaching that island. And I think that's exactly what this bill does.
Well, there's absolutely no question, and I think we all agree, as closet historians, that crisis accelerates change. And maybe news deserts were coming slowly. Our cover story on E&P next month is about the proliferation of news deserts. And it starts off with how COVID-19 has just put so many different markets into this inability to truly have a local news source. Now, you gentlemen then, did this thing kind of became viral, or did you take it to Dean Ridings? Dean, did you pick this up, or was it through the state associations? How did America's newspapers, the largest North American newspaper organization, get involved in this, Dean?
Well, Francis and Alan both are friends of our organization, and we've been talking all along, looking for the best way to mobilize our biggest asset, and that's our members. And we realized we needed the right piece of legislation, the right message, and this bill was absolutely spot on. It crosses over and meets everyone's needs. So this just made total sense to us, that we've been reaching out to our members, expanding the grassroots efforts to make sure that all our publishers know what's going on, but equally important, make sure that their audience knows about the importance of this act. And I think that the tenets in the act I want to focus on, regardless of how the bill moves, these tenets are incredibly important and make sense. And garnering support for these tenets will help advance our cause.
And once again, if someone is just tuning in for the first time, whether it's through YouTube or our various audio channels for E&P Reports, there are three basic components of this. Again, credits for advertising in local newspapers and local media, period. This is not just for newspapers. Even if I'm supporting a pure play local journalism outlet with advertising dollars, I could have a tax credit. Number two, credit for anybody who subscribes to local news. And number three, God forbid, a payroll credit for those of us that employ journalists. I, as a publisher now, have that expense as well. But without that critical content, there is no journalism. Now, Paul, this is interesting that you're working, I guess, with America's newspapers, because, Paul, you represent the local, the News Media Alliance. Yeah. I keep wanting to say NAA. Please forgive me, sir. I'm an old guy.
I have that trouble sometimes too.
But your core competency, you have many competencies, you do so much for the industry, is truly legislative. I mean, you are our voice in Washington, D.C., and we hire pros to do that. So how is it looking now? I mean, at the time of this taping and broadcast, Congress is away, correct? I mean, most of them have left town. Yes, no?
Well, it's more complicated than that. Actually, the House is on recess, and right. So back home, maybe potentially meeting with newsrooms and publishers and editors. The Senate technically is still in, and they're trying to see if they can get a deal on a CARES 2.0 bill, and that looks stalled, so it might actually carry over till September. But we have been working closely with America's newspapers, Seattle Times, Francis at Wick Communications. Our view generally is, as Dean said, there's some policy choices here that make sense. Some in the short term, some that might actually be more longer term, but they will support local journalism. And because of that, the News Media Alliance supports that. And we've begun to reach out to congressional offices like America's newspapers. We are reaching out to our members to encourage them to make contacts. And to date, I mean, we should point out that today we got 2 new Republican co-sponsors. We're up to 39.
39.
39.
Wow.
The mix is 23 Democrats and 16 Republicans. And from my perspective, who's been around for 30 years, that is a really good, strong bipartisan showing. Our goal is to try to get it over 100 over the next 2 months. Now's the time for newspaper publishers, editors, journalists to use August when policymakers are back home, probably through Zoom, meeting with editorial boards, maybe setting up Zoom meetings with state press associations, which are a great opportunity for state press associations to hear what policymakers are working on related to COVID. And then, of course, publishers in the room will ask for some help. And this is a perfect bill to promote in that kind of setting. So I think we have momentum, and the next 2 months really is going to be critical to build that support.
I got to ask you the question, Paul, you are definitely wired into the to the thought processes of what's going on in DC. Do these people actually care about us? I mean, aren't we the enemy to some of them? How you're giving me the head shake, and that makes me feel good.
You know, I feel good about it too, and we saw it really first couple of years ago when we led an effort to reverse the newsprint tariffs that were
exactly yes
Canadian importers, and essentially what we found is basically a third of the Senate co-sponsored a bill to reverse the tariffs, and we had over 100 members in the House, and 19 members of Congress testified at a hearing before the International Trade Commission. And we're seeing this now with this bill that Francis got it started for everybody, in that members of Congress know that their local newspaper is important. It provides context to their constituents. In some cases with weekly newspapers, it's really the only way in which that member of Congress can get information out to their constituents. So we're essential businesses. We're out there reporting. And now more than ever, our content is important to our local communities. And I think policymakers know that. Yes, you're going to have policymakers who are going to say they don't like the New York Times or they don't like the Wall Street Journal, and they want to criticize national newspapers or cable operations. But with their local news operators, they care about them because they know it's a connection to their.
Francis, you agree with that? You reached out to Kirkpatrick and you got a positive instant response. She cares about the local news operations in your state, correct?
Yeah, Mike. Kirkpatrick, Newhouse. What I'm finding with many of these legislators that we're reaching out to is they absolutely care about their constituents. They recognize that it is a core need for them to effectively represent, to have information flow of local professional journalism to exist. And so there's becoming a greater awareness and a real desire to help. And the biggest outcome that I'm seeing from this movement, and Dean and Paul and Alan may see something a little bit differently here, but we're really seeing a mass education to our lawmakers of the peril that this country is facing at this moment in time. As we move through the fall into the winter, if things do not materially get better, the reality is that we're going to continue to see an incredible strain and a loss of local journalism. And it's going to become almost irreparable in the damage that it's going to create. And so we know that something needs to get done. We have something that we can identify to. But also what's happening, and we're already starting to see this, is that other lawmakers are engaging local newspapers to find out if there's some other ways to look at this as well. So we have some momentum for journalism, and that's the key here. And this was kind of the impetus, the start of being able to really kind of point at a puck on the ice. And where this goes from here, I think is very encouraging, because we need some type of consideration from the federal level on how important local professional journalism is.
Alan, you concur? Yeah, I was going to ask you, Alan, because you talked to Newhouse, who was a Republican, and you felt the same energy there of supporting local news, Alan?
Yeah, and we've seen pretty strong support across the Washington delegation. There's a number of them who have signed on as co-supporters of this. And I will add to Francis's comment, I think it's not only that we need to help our legislators understand our peril, but we need to educate our readers as well. There was a Pew study last year that came out that 70% of people who responded thought that we were doing well financially. Local media was doing well financially. And we weren't doing well last year, and now with the pandemic, it's gotten 10 times worse. So I think there's a message there that we need to send as readers as well as to our legislators, that we do need help. We are in peril, and without some kind of a support, there are going to be far fewer journalism jobs across the country and far more news deserts.
Well, then Dean, that circles you in, because your organization has been putting a lot of energy. America's newspapers. You and I joked about this in one of our interviews. Like, my dad was a dentist. I never got my teeth cleaned. You know, the shoemaker's son never gets shoes. We're an industry that works towards branding our advertisers, but we've never been good at branding ourselves. How are you, Dean? Is this taking off? Are people running your cartoons that you're? I mean, those incredible Rob Turno political card. They're amazing what you're providing, and the ads you're putting out. Newspapers have your back, plus the ones that are coming out of the state associations as well, Dean, right?
They are, and it's, you know, I'm seeing a change in the attitude in publishers. You know, if you go back a decade or two, there's resistance to getting involved in legislative activities. I think there's less resistance. There's a better understanding that we are a business like other businesses. We need to work with our legislators like other businesses do. And newspapers are absolutely running the editorials. They're running columns. They're modifying them. We tell them use them however they want to use them. In fact, we have a new one that just launched about an hour ago, new cartoon as well. So we continue to push those out. Educating our members, but definitely educating their audience so they understand literally what's at stake here.
Paul, I was president. I was telling Alan before we started recording that I worked for Blethen for a short time, because I switched over from radio and TV management to newspapers at the Portland, Maine Press Herald. At the time, I was president of the Maine Association of Broadcasters. Now we're talking in the 90s now. Eddie Fritz, does that ring a bell? And my congressional leaders were, you know, two unimportant people. They were obviously, you know, we had Bill Cohen and the Speaker of the House, obviously, George Mitchell. And what he said to me, he used to wind me up and fly me into D.C. because we were doing must carry then and retransmission consent, if you remember, in those days. But he wanted me in D.C. because he said these words. He said, they'll listen more to you, the local guy, than they will to me. Is that true? And sometimes in your opinion as well, Paul?
Yeah, I want to answer that in two ways, because you brought up the broadcasters. First, we met with a congressman, Will Hurd, one time, David Chavrin, our CEO.
Right.
And Will Hurd says, you know, I never hear from any of my newspapers. The broadcasters are in my office every week talking to me. And he's from San Antonio area, right? Which tells you something as far as broadcasters' willingness to be in front of policymakers. Now, they're a regulated industry with the Federal Communications Commission, so that's part of it. But it's pretty much indicative where we haven't had that history of working with policymakers. Now, the other point is, and the analogy I use is that in football, speed is the most important thing.
Yes.
In getting anything done in Capitol Hill, it's a contact from someone back home. And to get anything done, for our industry, we're going to need publishers to weigh in with their policymakers to explain what's gone on with the industry, to talk about the essential business and role that we play in our society, and then lay out the merits for these policy provisions. And then ask them to co-sponsor. Now, will this bill actually be the bill that crosses the finish line, you know, through the sausage making process?
Yes.
To change. But you want to get momentum. You want these policymakers to support the local newspaper by signing on as a co-sponsor.
Well, when Francis and I first talked okay, Alan, you wanted to chime in, sir? Did you?
Well, I just want to stress the urgency of doing that. Right now, we have this wonderful window when legislators are home in their districts. Now's the time we need people to reach out and make those connections and have those conversations.
I asked Francis in our first interview about, I think it was almost a month ago or 3 or 4 weeks, and I said, where is the clearinghouse of all this information? Do we have the talking points we need? Guess what? Dean has got them up now on America's Newspapers website, and we at E&P are going to put up a special URL that points to all this information to make it easy. editorandpublisher.com/LJSA. A simple, easy place to go. And correct me if I'm wrong, because Paul, remember, I did this in my youth. You need to know the phone numbers, right? You need to know who you're, because some of us don't know with all the redistricting I mean, I remember when I went to visit Capitol Hill last year, I went into the wrong office to get my badge for the House because I was redistricted. You got to know who you're calling, right?
Yeah, one point I want to make on that, because with COVID and closures, you may not be able to reach somebody in the Washington office.
Right.
So they're still providing constituent services back home in their congressional offices. So what I would advise is you look up your representative in the House of Representatives, find out the name, look at their office locations, call the local office closest to your newspaper.
And then grab the talking points, rehearse them, correct? Know what, you don't waste time on this thing. And you say exactly the bill, you say the number, and you talk about the benefits. Dean, am I got this right? Is there anything else you would add to the call for action?
Absolutely. I think you've nailed it. We want to make sure that they communicate that local journalism is at stake. Time is of the essence. We need their support. And even signing on as a co-sponsor to this bill is very important.
So we could ask them, would you mind signing on as a co-sponsor? This is what we need to say, correct, gentlemen, all of you. Paul, I have to ask the question, are we working at all with our brethren at NAB on this? Because they benefit as well. They get 2 of the 3 tenants of this. Have you guys reached across the aisle to them?
We've certainly talked with them, and right now under COVID-19 economic and response legislation, they're working with us on PPP expansion and trying to shift government advertising to local media. I think at some point in time they will focus in on that provision. I've also reached out to the National Federation of Independent Business, for example, that represents small
business. There you go, of course.
And said this is something that could benefit your members. Is this something that you could help us work on? So we have a coalition actually developing of African American newspapers, Hispanic publications. We've got the CWA News Guild that's part of it. And so we're trying to, expand the tent. And so if people have connections to these other trade associations, feel free to reach out to them, encourage them to support the effort. But I think on that advertising piece, we can grow the support for that. And maybe that gets branched off quickly before the end of the year. And maybe that something gets done. But first, as Dean said, we got to grow that co-sponsorship list.
So there you go. Go ahead. Yes.
Just one more thing here. I just want to really compliment Dean and Paul. And, there's a really unified voice here, and that has not been typical in our industry. And
no,
it really heartens me to see that. So I just want to thank both organizations for their support of this and coordination. It's pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, well, again, crisis creates or accelerates change. It's always been like herding cats with us in the past. Now, finally, maybe we're learning to just congeal. We're all one, right? Wick, Blethyn, you name it. Gannett benefits from this. Even the little dogs, even the small community-free weeklies benefit from this. So let's all do this now. This is the time is critical. HR 7640, Local Journalism Sustainability Act. Go to newspapers.org, Dean, or you can find all the information. Editor and publisher will make sure it's there as well. And we are going to make it a mission for our industry to try to at least make contact with each and every senator from the local level. That's what matters the most now in each and every congressperson. Did I say that right, Dean? Is that the mission?
You did, and I'd like to add one piece to that is, what one person can do is important. You look at what Francis and what Alan have done. They've made the calls, they've reached out, and they've gotten the sponsorships. So one person can make a big difference.
There you go. I want to thank Francis, thank you for your Jerry Maguire moment. At the end of the movie, Francis, he did get the big account, if you remember. So it's okay. And Renee Zellweger to boot, so it's not a bad play. Alan Fisco, an honor to chat with an old boss, and our paths have crossed. Paul Boyle, it's great to have you in our first E&P Reports. I'd like to have you back, sir, and talk about all the other, once the dust settles from all this, and talk about where we are in D.C. That'd be great.
Happy to. Thanks, Mike.
And Dean, you and I are attached at the wrists and ankles. It's always fun to do another project with you. Thanks, gentlemen. Please stay healthy and well. The industry needs you.